Hey, welcome back to We Be Kids again. My name's Danny, I'm one of the founders at We Be Kids. I'm an outdoor educator and a storyteller. If it's your first time at We Be Kids, know that there are over 200 activities for you to engage with, all for free, to help you get out into nature and improve your well-being. Today, I've come up to the woods because I wanted to tell you a story. It's October and we're getting towards the end of October, which is Halloween. So I wanted to tell you a Halloween tale. And this tale is from Scotland, and it was often told by the traveller community. So a big thank you to them for sharing their stories so that we could hear them and share them to others too. Now this story is called Archie's Broom. And this story starts on a small croft in Scotland where two brothers lived, one called Archie and one called Alex. And the small croft where they lived was in a beautiful place. It was on the top of a great hill that had great views all around. But it didn't have good soil. You see, it was built on a great big granite boulder. And even though they tried to tend the land, it often didn't give them enough to see them through the year. So both Alex and Archie would often go off and look for work elsewhere. But out of the pair of them, it was Alex that found the work, and it was Alex who got the money. But it was Archie who had to do all of the back-breaking labour. They would build walls and lay roads, and it was always Archie who did the digging and who lifted the big heavy rocks. And if Archie was lucky, at the end of a hard week's work, his brother would pay him, but never any more than a sixpence, which wasn't much money. And then one day, Archie and Alex were out doing some work for a farmer. They were building a dike in a field, and Archie had been digging and laying the big stones. He had beads of sweat running off his head. His hands were hard and tough from all of the lifting. And he just sat back just to take a breath when he noticed another man coming walking across the fields. This man had a little hat on and a brown waistcoat and brown trousers. He walked over and he said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I take some of the heather from that field?" And Archie looked across at this field that was covered with beautiful purple heather. Archie said, "No, go ahead, help yourself. But it's not mine, it belongs to the farmer." And the tinker said, "Oh, it'll be totally fine." And he walked off. And he took a knife out and he began to cut the heather. As he cut the heather, Archie watched. He cut it and he stacked it and he cut it and he stacked it. And Archie went over and he said, "Do you mind if I ask what you're up to?" And the man said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a tinker." He said, "I'm making brooms. At this time of year, people always need a broom to sweep the steps and clean the floor." And Archie said, "Oh, how do you do that then?" And the tinker said, "Well, you get the heather, and then you find a nice long straight stick, maybe a hazel pole, and with some good string or some good wire, you attach the heather to the pole, and then you tidy it up with your knife." And Archie was instantly impressed. He started to form an idea. He said to the tinker, "Do you mind if I ask how much you charge for one of those?" And the tinker said, "Yeah, of course. For one like this, it'd be about sixpence." Now, Archie was shocked. He wasn't sure if he heard right. "Sixpence for one like that?" The tinker said, "Yeah, and sometimes I can tidy them up and make them a little bit better, and I get a full shilling for one." Archie couldn't believe it. Archie said, "How many can you make in a day?" The tinker said, "Maybe 5 or 6, and I normally sell about 3 or 4 a day." Now Archie was totally shocked. His mouth fell open. He walked straight over to where his brother Alex was having a nap. He woke him up. He said, "I quit. I've had enough of this back-breaking work. I'm going to go off and make brooms." And Alex began to laugh. He said, "You can't make a broom." And Archie pointed. He said, "I've just learned from him over there." Alex said, "Yeah, he's a tinker. He said they've been making brooms all their lives. They learned from their parents, who learned from their parents. You can't just wander off and make a broom. Who do you think you are? And Archie said, well, I can, and I'm going to. And with that, he turned and he headed into the field of heather. And there he pulled out a knife that he carried in his pocket and he began to cut the heather up until he had a great big bundle, maybe 3 times more than the tinker. And he put it under his arm and he began to struggle all the way back to his cottage. And on the way back there, he found a nice long straight hazel pole. He went in the kitchen and he laid all the heather down and he put the pole in between. And then he searched around until he found some nice copper wire. And with the copper wire, he began to wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap. You see, he had so much heather, it took lots and lots of wrapping. And when it was done, he held it up and he got his knife and he trimmed up the edges. And he carried it outside and he stood it up against the wall and he stepped back. And with a heart full of pride, he admired his work. He said, that is a cracking broom. And he picked it up and he put it over his shoulder and he set off walking with it in the hope that he could sell it for 6pence. And he walked and he began to knock on doors. But every time he knocked on the door, people looked at it. They picked it up, they said, this is too big. It's too heavy for sweeping, we can't buy that. You see, he'd used at least 5 times the amount of heather that the tinker had. But he didn't give up. He kept going, door to door to door, all the way through the afternoon. But everybody who answered gave him the same story. It's too heavy. Keep going, we're not buying it. And on he went. But Archie never gave up. And just as the day was coming to an end, he looked up into a distant hill and he saw a white cottage up there. He thought, I'm going to go. Maybe there's somebody up there who will buy it. So off he went and he climbed up the big hill. And he got to the cottage. It had a thatched roof, beautiful white walls and a blue door. And he knocked on the cottage door. No answer. He knocked again. This time he heard footsteps, heavy footsteps coming towards the door. And then the door swung open and there stood in the doorway, filling the entire frame, was a huge woman. He looked at her. When she looked down at him, she had 5 big chins and 3 huge, ginormous bellies. She looked a little bit like a walrus in a dress. And Archie looked at her, he said, would you be interested in buying this broom? And the woman looked down. She looked at it. She picked it up. She admired it. She began to swing it a little bit. And then she did the funniest thing. She sat on the edge of it. She said, how much do you want for it? And Archie explained. He said, well, it's my first broom that I've ever made. He said, so I'm just looking for 6pence. And the woman, who was called Big Mags, she went inside and she come back out. And in her hand she had a solid silver 6pence. She said, young man, this is the exact broom that I've been looking for. I've been trying to find one for years and never had the luck. You have brought me exactly what I want. And because of that, not only am I going to give you 6pence, but I'm going to give you a magical 6pence. And as she said that, she leaned forward. And as she leaned forward, Archie noticed a little sparkle in the lady's eye. She said, this 6pence is magical. Whenever you spend it, another one exactly the same will appear in your pocket. And with that, Archie was amazed. He said, thank you. Thank you, lady, thank you, lady. And he grabbed it and he put it in his pocket and off he went. And as he went, he realised that from that moment on, he would be free from his wicked brother. But you see, when that lady had leaned forward and Archie had noticed a sparkle in her eye, it wasn't any sparkle. was a magical sparkle. You see, the lady, Big Mags, she was a witch. And we all know that in the world there are two types of witches. Bad, wicked witches, or good, kind witches. And Big Mags was the kindest and the happiest of all the good witches. And she was so happy that she'd found this broom. You see, for years and years and years, she couldn't find a broom that she could fit on because she was so big. All the other brooms just wouldn't do. Not only was she happy, she was now filled with excitement because the next night was Halloween. And at last, she could go to the great witch gathering in the silver birch grove down in the witchy forest. So the next day, she got herself ready. She packed all of her favourite Halloween things. And just as the sun set, she jumped on her broomstick. She said some magic words and whoosh, she flew out of the door. She headed down the hill and she flew for a while until she arrived at the great witchy woods. And when she got to the witchy woods, she hovered above until she saw the silver birch grove, a great big opening that was circled by beautiful silver birch trees. And down there in the middle were all the witches. And great Mags flew down and she entered, and as she flew around, all the wicked witches were surprised to see her. Who invited that fat lump? Who brought the walrus in the dress? Mind your chins, won't you, Big Mags? They began to shout insults at her. But Big Mags wasn't bothered. She'd heard it all before. She swooped down and she began to circle on her broom around the witches. And as she circled and circled, the witches got closer and closer and closer together until they were in a very tight circle. And Big Mags jumped off her broom. She raised her arms and she began to say some magical witchy words. And as she did, all of the witches' brooms released themselves from the witches' hands. And they began to circle around the witches, getting higher. 1, 2, 3 circles, and then with a flash of light, all the brooms shot up into the trees and got stuck. And with that, great Mags gave a huge happy cackle, and she turned and she flew off into the distance. All the witches, well, it took them hours and hours to get home, walking through the big deep bogs and the mossy areas and the great hills. Well, as they walked, they had lots and lots of time to think about that great lesson they'd learned from Big Mags. And ever since that day, if you look up into the tops of silver birch trees, particularly older ones, you will still see those witches' brooms hanging there as a reminder to us that insults never work and kindness is always the best way forward. So I hope you enjoyed that story. Nice little Halloween tale. Lots of Halloween tales are quite gory and have ghouls and ghosts, so it was nice for the main character, the hero of the story, to be somebody who carried happiness and kindness and joy with them. So please share that story far and wide. Tell the tales to anybody you can. Thanks for stopping by at Weeby Kids, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Bye.